Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Chris Elias, the President of Global Development at the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, and it's my pleasure to be moderating this first plenary session today. We've still got people filtering in, but we've got a tight schedule and a great panel, so we're going to get started. One of the wonderful things about coming together, as we do every couple of years at the International Conference on Family Planning, to talk about family planning is all of the different ways you can consider the issues. We had a good set of discussions in the satellite discussions over the weekend and some of the kickoff events yesterday about the importance of contraceptive services, voluntary, high quality, diverse contraceptive services for women as a right for women and girls, as a way to invest in the health of families and communities and nations. And this morning, we're going to talk a bit about some of the broader impact, the return on investment of family planning. Not only is it the right thing to do and the smart thing to do in terms of empowering women and meeting the needs of individuals, but it's a very good investment for the community. We believe that the lives of people in poor countries will improve faster in the next 15 years than at any other time in history, but only if we invest in women and girls and build stronger families. The goal of this plenary session is to illustrate that the vast returns that we can achieve by investing in family planning, again, at the individual, family, community, and national level. Our prosperity is directly linked to the health and well-being of women and girls, because no society can achieve its full potential when half of its population isn't able to reach their full potential. Women and girls must have the ability to make decisions about their health and their futures, particularly when it comes to whether, when, and how many children to have. When women and couples have the education and tools that they need to time and space their pregnancies, the health and social barriers that keep so many families in poverty are diminished. With better access to family planning, fewer girls drop out of school because of an unintended pregnancy, fewer mothers die while giving life, more children have the opportunity to celebrate their 5th birthday and many other birthdays after that, and more women and girls have the ability to protect their health, fully participate in society, and determine their own futures, as well as the futures of their countries. So I'd like to start off by introducing a short film on the demographic dividend. And while it's playing, I'd like to invite our first 3 panelists to come up and join me on the stage. So can we roll the video?
What is the demographic dividend? The demographic dividend is the economic growth that can result from favorable changes in a country's age structure. When there are more people in a country who contribute to the economy than depend on it, and the right social and economic conditions are in place, a massive economic surge can occur. To achieve the demographic dividend, countries need to invest in women's empowerment, health, quality education, and employment opportunities. Empowerment, so that women have the rights and freedom to define their lives, including to decide if and when to have children. Health and education, so that boys and girls are strong, healthy, and have the schooling and training they need to succeed. Employment, so that people have job opportunities to put their skills to use and contribute to a growing economy. At the heart of the demographic dividend is ensuring women have access to contraceptive information and services. That's because when women can choose to have smaller families, they and their families enjoy better health, education, and economic opportunities. On a national level, a country's fertility rate declines, and a higher percentage of children survive and grow into healthy adults. The population age structure shifts with a larger workforce and fewer dependents. When this larger workforce is healthy, well-educated, and productively employed, a country unlocks the demographic dividend. Contraceptive access drives empowerment and complements investments in health, education, and employment, setting the stage for countries to enjoy accelerated economic growth and improved quality of life. Invest in family planning. Invest for a lifetime of returns.
Thank you. Thanks again to our panelists for joining us. We're going to have two panels. Let me start by introducing the first panel. Furthest to my left, we have Dr. Uzziel Ndagijimana, who is the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning of Rwanda, our host country. Dr. Ernesto Pernia, the Secretary of Social and Economic Planning and Director General, Minister of National and Economic and Development Agency of the Philippines, and Annette Dixon, the Vice President of Human Development at the World Bank. And what I'd like to do to kick it off is to ask them each the same question. If we're all in an elevator going up to our floor, and you only had 2 minutes to explain the demographic dividend, how would you do it? Uzziel, maybe we'll start with you.
Thank you. Demographic dividend refers to gains in terms of economic growth due to changes in the population age structure, where we have a larger size of population in the working age and less proportion of dependent population. And this, for this workforce to generate dividend, it must be well equipped with the right knowledge, the right skills, and must be healthy to be productive and to contribute to economic growth. Thank you.
Great. Still got 2 floors to go. Dr. Pernia?
Yes. A minister from Rwanda has actually already defined what demographic dividend is. Well, it's a word that was hardly used in the heyday of the population issue, in the 60s and 70s, even through the early 80s. But now it has become a household word. And as the minister has said, it's really returns on investment in family planning. And according to research by the Copenhagen Consensus, it can be as high as 120%. For every dollar spent on family planning, the returns are on the order of up to 120%. So more than double a dollar spent on family planning. And that is in terms of higher savings on the part of the family, which from the standpoint of the state is also going to be higher savings if you aggregate the families in the country. And meaning that from the standpoint of the family, they can invest more and better quality in education, in better quality education and health services. And also from the state, that will be the effect on the state's finances. And then with higher savings, greater investment can be invested in human capital, in the child per child, higher human capital spending per child, and then with higher savings as well from the national standpoint, there can be investment in other areas of required for the potential growth of the economy. And then with higher investment, higher growth rate for the economy, higher incomes, and this can become a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious circle when there is no investment in family planning, especially when you start off from a poor family. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernesto. Annette?
Well, another way to frame it is to actually talk about what's the alternative to having a demographic dividend. And the alternative picture is when a country has very high population growth, it's very, very hard for that country to develop, because there's a very strong negative correlation between high population growth and strong human capital. That's, good health and education outcomes. And as the World Bank's been documenting, countries need to build their human capital in order to grow their way out of poverty. So if a country is doubling its population every 23 years, it's likely that that's also associated with lots more children dying in infancy, mothers dying in childbirth, high stunting rates, low education participation, and poor education outcomes. So the idea is to turn that around and to turn this vicious circle into a virtual circle, to get as the video said, and as my colleagues on the panel said, to get to that point where you are bringing the population growth down at the same time you're improving the health and education outcomes of the population.
Great. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists some questions, but then we're going to take some questions from our virtual community. And of course, those here in the room can be part of that virtual community. But let me come back to you, Uzziel, and ask you, Rwanda just completed its national strategy for transformation. How did the demographic dividends, if it did, contribute to the strategy, and what was the added value of the national demographic dividend profile as you were developing the national strategy for transformation?
Last year we developed our 7-year plan, which is the national strategy for transformation. And before that, with the support of the UNFPA, we conducted a study on the demographic dividend for Rwanda. At the same time, for a longer-term vision, we also conducted a study on the future drivers of growth in collaboration with the World Bank. So for the NST1, which is the National Strategy for Transformation, it's the first strategy. The study on the demographic dividend was highly considered in our medium-term strategy. The demographic dividend for Rwanda showed us that with the right investment in health, in education, in the sectors, Rwanda can benefit from the demographic dividend up to 28% of the targeted per capita income, which is a significant contribution. So in our strategy, we have a special emphasis on access to education, quality of education, access to healthcare, and access to health services with 2 dimensions: geographical access and financial access. There is a special program on early childhood development to fight malnutrition, to ensure good health from the pregnant mothers to babies up to 5 years. So to make sure that the children grow with the right ability to learn before they start the primary education. We also focus on innovation at the higher education and technical skills to prepare the next generation with the right skills and knowledge that match the labor market demand. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pernia, we understand that you recently added family planning as an 11th component to a 10-point economic plan of the government of the Philippines. How did you convince the government to do that?
Well, actually, it's number 10 in the 0 to 10-point socio-economic agenda, which was which emerged from the economic team, essentially the Secretary of Finance, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of the Economy. During the campaign period for the President, I was already de facto economic advisor to the president, and so I began to draft the socio-economic agenda. But at that time, it was only up to 8 points. And then I then added 2 more, and this is reaching for the demographic dividend, meaning a full implementation of the reproductive health law, as well as vigorously promoting science and technology and innovation. And these 2 chapters, these 2 agenda are supposed to extend the growth potential of the economy, make it not only inclusive economic growth, but also sustainable economic growth into the distant future. And that is the reason why it was readily taken in to the 0 to 10 point socio-economic agenda. The 0 is the peace and order, law and order, and then stamping out corruption and criminality, which is also a foundation for the other socio-economic agenda to be operative. And that's the story. And so it was not difficult. I was already in the campaign team of the president, not in the hustings, but just on the desk.
Great. Great. Annette, Ernesto said that the demographic dividends become a household word. Probably the first place that kind of a concept became a household term was at the World Bank. You've been thinking for a while now, many years, about how to take the demographic dividend into the design of programs at the World Bank. I'd be interested in some of your experience about how you apply that lens, particularly within the new human capital program, and you may want to say something about the human capital index and whether you've been able to see some pattern in terms of how countries think about the demographic dividend and how they show up on that index.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think the World Bank has been on a journey, and what we really have been trying to do over time is to actually tell a stronger story, a more compelling story about the urgency of investing in human development outcomes and how important that is for helping countries to grow their economies in order to reduce poverty and raise the living standards. So we've always measured productive capital. In the last couple of decades, we've also started measuring the importance of natural capital, the endowments in land and forests and so on. But it's only recently that we've actually been measuring the importance of human capital in the overall wealth of the planet. And what I think, we're all in this room together because we're committed to this agenda. We know this. But what we have been able to do is to size it in economic terms. And it turns out that human capital is 70% of the wealth of the planet. It's invested in the people on the planet. But in developed countries, it's 2/3 of the wealth of the planet. But in developed countries, it's 70% of their wealth, and in developing countries, it's 40%. So it becomes a critical strategy for developing countries to actually rapidly improve the health and education outcomes of their population. And family planning is absolutely critical to that, because at the risk of oversimplifying it, if you can grow the economy faster than the population grows, you will raise the living standards of everybody in the society. So that's the task that we're trying to do. And this index is a way of measuring this across countries, so countries get a sense of where they're at, and relative not just to themselves, but to a frontier, which is the maximum amount of education and health potential that their population has. And that's to create a sense of urgency, because when policymakers are making choices, they're going to go for things that show faster results. And we need to actually balance that, because the time horizon is also critical for these things as well. So that's what we've been trying to do. And actually, you know, sitting here on the stage, the Philippines and the minister from Rwanda, I mean, these are countries that get this and are realizing that they have to actually accelerate the rate of progress, or otherwise the population growth is going to overwhelm them even more. And in some countries, frankly, it's a source of instability because critical resources are under pressure. And so it's actually important for the future stability of the country to actually make this a much more urgent agenda.
Great. Uzziel, I want to ask you, you know, you were the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Health. You know, we talk to many people in the health sector, and we find that the demographic dividend is often a compelling way to make the argument to finance ministries and heads of state about the importance of some of these human capital investments in health and education, et cetera. And I imagine when you were PermSec and health, you made those arguments as well. And I'm wondering if anything changed when you became the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning. Were those arguments, did you just convince yourself, or did you become more skeptical about them?
Thank you. I think I was lucky to start by the health sector before joining the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, because I'm in charge of the economic development, national development plans, and I have a better understanding of the health sector than a person from infrastructure or from education or agriculture. So when I was the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Health, of course, I focused more on my responsibility, which was the health sector, and I treated the issues of demography from the health perspective. My preoccupation was to make sure that the family planning product and services are accessible to the population in all hospitals, health centers, even at village level. And this happened. And we've seen an impressive increase in contraceptive uptake from about 28% to 48% by 2014-15. But now, as the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning, I have a wider scope, and I consider demographic issues in a holistic manner and as a development issue. It's the major determinant of future growth and development. So that is why what I said earlier, our national strategy for transformation focuses more on human capital development, which include the family planning, education, health, equal opportunity for all, financial inclusion, men, women, young people. We have special programs on productivity and youth employment. We have a special program for technical and vocational education to increase the skills of young people and to improve their employability. But also we have a special program for entrepreneurship and access to finance to help young people, men and women, to actually create their jobs. We have improved the doing business environment. We are number 29 globally, and we are focusing on private sector development for job creation to absorb the young people who join the labor market.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to have a quick question for Ernesto and Annette, and then we're going to go to the virtual community for questions so that we can keep on time. But Ernesto, sticking with this theme of convincing people who may not be as convinced as us, I understand you recently gave a presentation on the demographic dividend to the cabinet and talked about the National Development Plan. Were they easily convinced, or Any interesting feedback from that discussion?
No problem. It was the presentation and the actions needed were readily approved by the entire cabinet.
Oh.
So no problem. And it's also because the political leadership, our president now, President Duterte, is fully passionate and convinced about the importance of investment in family planning. In his town where he was mayor, the city where he was mayor, there is no problem with unwanted pregnancies and no problem with street children running around begging, So there's no problem. And so it's a major theme in our Philippine Development Plan, 2017 to 2022. And so we are really pushing all hands on deck now in terms of hastening the implementation, the full implementation of the reproductive health law at the national, regional, and local levels.
Great, thank you. And Annette, one last question before we open up to the virtual community. But at the Gates Foundation, we watched with interest the launch of the Human Capital Index at your annual meetings in Bali last month, and noticed that some of the countries where we have some of our biggest and strongest collaborations were in the bottom 10 of your index, and have been now in a discussion with the leaders of those countries who were obviously disappointed to be at the lower end of the Human Capital Index, and are wondering what steps they can take that could help quickly change their ranking. So if you were talking to one of those countries that is lower on the Human Capital Index, what would you describe as some of the first steps they could take?
Okay, well, there are countries that actually have made quite fast progress, and that's actually really motivating for countries that perhaps are not where they want to be. There are examples of countries that have, so for example, Peru, I think, has halved its stunting rate in less than 7 years. Vietnam has significantly improved education outcomes in the last decade, and there are other good examples, including here on the African continent, in Senegal and Malawi and here in Rwanda. But I think the most actually important thing for countries at the bottom to do actually is to take a women's empowerment approach. And the reason that this is really important is that the countries who have done this sort of combination of ensuring that women have access to reproductive health and have the ability to plan their families, that societies that encourage girls to stay in school and achieve, countries that have women in the labour market, the developing countries that have got job creation, which has been possible to actually attract jobs for women, to enable large numbers of women to enter the labour market. These are countries that have had tremendous success with their demographic dividend. And so if I was in front of one of the countries at the bottom of the index, this is something that I think we would be really encouraging them to take. And in fact, the countries in the Sahel, which are the countries mostly at the bottom of the index, are actually working with us and with UNFPA on a women's empowerment project, which the Global Financing Facility for Women, Child and Adolescent Health is supporting, and really taking this approach. So I think that it's actually starting, but the idea is to actually follow it through so that women do actually get to participate in the economy, have access to finance and credit so they can improve their livelihoods of their families, because it's not just a good investment in these women and these girls, but it's actually welfare maximizing for the whole society, and it improves the outcomes of the next generation. So that's where I would start.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to open up to a few questions. I understand they're just going to appear on the screens. Okay. Oh, there we go. We have a question for you, Uzziel, from Pious Rwanda. What are the youth programs in Rwanda that have been most successful in preparing the youth?
Thank you. There are many. The major one is the universal access to basic education, which was adopted in 2008. And since then, we have seen the enrollment to primary, secondary, and the technical and vocational education in the university growing very fast. Number two is the National Employment Program. It has different components. One is that we have created a guarantee fund to support startups, new projects of young people, but also we have created across the country vocational and training schools to equip the young people with the skills to be employed or to create jobs. And we have also created a platform to sensitize young people, to make them, to increase their confidence in themselves, to have plans for the future. So but also in terms of innovation, we've seen young people developing ideas, and they are assisted to translate ideas into projects. Specifically in the digital technologies, we've seen several products developed by our young people in many sectors, like in e-commerce, in drone technologies, in logistics, and in many other solutions. Thank you.
Great. Next question. Are the benefits of the demographic dividend equally as important for boys and girls? And is the burden as well? From Idren in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Ernesto?
Okay. Yeah. No, I think it's, well, it's more, I think it's especially more important for the girls, but the boys would also benefit in the sense that the educational system tends to provide equal education opportunities to boys and girls, and especially in countries where girls are underprivileged, then that's really going to be good for them. In countries where girls are almost on equal footing with boys, it's not as pronounced in terms of impact on the human capital of girls. But in general, I think we can look at investment in family planning as an investment in social infrastructure, which facilitates the investment in human capital, with education and health and nutrition, which then increases the capacity of children to learn, and then also the capacity of those who are still below the age of the working force age, their capacity to become creative and productive when they enter the labor force, and then so on and so forth.
Great. Annette, you want to add to that?
Can I just jump in and add an example, because I think it really answers this question really well. So the people at the World Bank who are smarter than me have done some modelling, and they've taken the case of Nigeria, and particularly because Nigeria has got the largest population of any country on the African continent. And they've projected that if the average family size reduced by just one child by 2050, so that's only 32 years away, the population, if they reduced just by one child per family, that would lead to a 29% increase in the GDP, and that would be the equivalent of lifting 53 million people out of extreme poverty in Nigeria in just 32 years. So that's how powerful it is for boys and for girls.
Great. And we take one last quick question from the virtual audience. What do you think is the most important factor to have in order to reap the highest potential of the demographic dividend in the next 10 to 20 years? So maybe I'll ask all three panelists to give me one sentence answer. from Sally in Uganda.
I can think of 10.
Okay, you can think of 10. Just give us one, Annette.
Well, I said women's empowerment, and the other is committed leadership.
Great. Ernesto?
Yes. I think, the capacity to learn and be in education instead of dropping out of school would be very, very important and very useful to children in Africa, which would then prepare them for, adulthood in terms of becoming creative and productive members of the workforce and contributing to society and the economy.
Okay. Uzziel, one sentence.
Access to education and health, family planning, and macroeconomic reform to create jobs and to absorb the young people who join the new market, the labor market.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our first panelists. While the panelists are changing, I'll invite our panelists for the two panelists for our second panel up. And maybe just summarizing my own answer to that question, I think one of the common themes that we heard, education, women's empowerment, et cetera, all go to the theme of the International Conference on Family Planning and to investing in a lifetime of returns. And I think that's actually a good segue to the second part of our panel, where we want to talk about how advancing the family planning agenda has a broader impact on health, finance, environment, and security issues. And I'm really happy to welcome two panelists, Professor Hans-Peter Kohler, who's from the Copenhagen Consensus at the University of Pennsylvania, and Ms. Jane Nyathi, the International Conference on Family Planning youth leader from Zimbabwe. So, Hans-Peter, I'll start with you. You were the author of the Copenhagen Consensus study that identified investing in universal access to contraception as the second best buy to achieving the SDGs, second only to trade liberalization. Can you tell us more about that conclusion and your assertion that for every dollar invested in universal access, society reaps the benefits equivalent to $120?
So thank you very much, Chris. So indeed, these report documents that the return to investing in family planning are very high, with benefits up to about $120. A bit of background. So this idea of this Copenhagen Consensus was to look at policies interventions that facilitate sustainable development goals across a very broad range. And this comparison across this diverse policies was enabled by looking at the returns to investment. So this approach tends to favor policies that have long-term effects and have resulted in improvements in lives across multiple domains: health, gender equality, well-being, economic development. Now, fertility decisions and reproductive health outcomes have profound impact on individuals' lives, parents, children, youth alike. And the collectivity of these decisions, as well as reproductive health outcomes, has critical influences on social and economic development broadly construed. So in essence, the report shows that what many of us already know, enabling women, men, couples to achieve the sexual reproductive health outcomes they desire is an essential and fundamental aspect of our development investments and health investments. And we've heard before that these investments have additional benefits, increasing the health of mothers and children, increasing human capital, gender equality, income, and so forth. But importantly, right, these effects are reinforced through a set of social, demographic, economic feedback mechanisms. So this gives rise, or this allows these returns of investments to family planning to unfold over decades, or give rise to this lifetime of return that is cited here. So this contribution of family planning investments to a set of sustained and interrelated improvements in well-being, that makes investments in sexual reproductive health such an attractive investment. This role of family planning program hasn't always been recognized, and as many of you may know, there were very critical voices out in the past. But I think there's been a fundamental transformation of the evidence on this topic in the last 10 years. And when we did our study and building on this new evidence, we came up with the strong support that the returns to investment to sexual reproductive health are so high. And in the spirit, let me add a caveat. It's clear that investing in family planning programs is no fix-it-all miracle pill for economic development, quite to the contrary. But what our report shows, and consistent with the discussion here, if implemented well and if implemented with a set of complementary policies, the returns can be very high. And that's in essence what this report has shown.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to come back to that, but I want to bring Jane in first. Jane, the theme of the conference is family planning, investing in a lifetime of returns. From a young person's perspective, how do you see this phrase being relevant to you, if it's relevant to you?
Thank you so much. So what we have to realize is that contraception and family planning is a basic human right. And every young person, every woman has a right to access family planning. And to me as a young person, investing in family planning will actually mean that we are empowering women, we are actually making them visible in the community. Just because what I have realized when I was going through some research, 49 million adolescent girls actually drop out of school every year. So you can imagine 49 million dropping out of school. What impact does that have to the economy? What does it have to our social lives? What does that have actually to the environment? And then it comes to me that in the United States, actually, one individual dropping out of school, it will mean that it's 300,000 of a lifetime personal earnings that are lost, and of which the government at the same time will lose a revenue of 280,000. And so imagine if multiplied by 49 million, how much are we losing as a nation? How much are we losing globally? How much are we losing as communities? And so to me, family planning and investing in it will mean that we're empowering women, we are keeping them in schools, we are making them visible in the economy, in the nation, in our nations, in our communities. We are actually saving a lot of lives, we are actually saving financially, and we are actually living in an environment and that is sustainable for the future generations. And so basically, when we invest in family planning, we are actually giving a voice to the adolescent woman who actually has dropped out of school, and we're actually saving them from the effects that come with dropping out of school. And so it is actually important that we actually invest in family planning.
Great. And so Jane, let me just follow up. As a new generation leader in family planning, what do you think is the single most important factor to address to meet the needs of youth now and in the future?
Okay, I believe that it is actually important that the leaders and the government be committed in actually investing in family planning, just because with investment in family planning, they should be accountable to their citizens. It is that one factor, accountability, for them to be accountable for everything that actually happens, especially when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and family planning. We are saying that they should actually come up with a contraceptive security strategy, which actually will make it possible for even the most vulnerable and the poorest in the community to access family planning. Just because with a contraceptive security strategy, then we say even the person who is in the remotest area is actually able to access family planning. And with the government being committed and accountable for everything that has to do with sexual and reproductive health, then we are saying that each and every adolescent girl will have a free, affordable, comprehensive family planning services. And with the government that is accountable, we are saying that funds will actually be accounted for. Just because we realize in most African countries made a commitment in FP 2020 at the London Summit in 2012. And actually, most of them have not lived up to those commitments. And the adolescent girls are actually suffering just because of that. A lot of people's future has actually been diminished and destroyed just because one person failed to actually live up to their commitments. And so accountability to me will actually mean that we reach our 2030, and 2030 be a year where we're going to celebrate and say we truly have done something for our adolescent girls and young women.
Thank you, Jane. What strikes me, Jane, from your comments and the comments on the previous panel are that the importance of leadership, good and bad, that when there is strong leadership, as we heard from our colleagues in Rwanda and the Philippines, to invest in human capital, women's empowerment, family planning services, we can see rapid change. And yet, when we see leadership that makes promises that they don't follow through on, we actually not only are disappointed, but we're misled. And I think, you know, Hans-Peter, coming back to you, one of the other themes that came out in the discussion that I was in, a couple of discussions yesterday, is this importance of changing our mindset from thinking about family planning and women's empowerment programs as an expenditure in the government budget and thinking about it as an investment. Certainly, there aren't that many investments I know where you can get 120-time return on your dollar investment. And I was in a panel yesterday with Oh Ying, our conference organizer, who said that he thought that it was too conservative, that he thought it was much more than 120, because you had been somewhat conservative in the Copenhagen Consensus in measuring the economic and health benefits, but that there were other benefits like mitigation of climate change, et cetera, that could actually increase that return on investment. What do you think of those comments?
And I agree, and for those who have been involved in trying to make these calculations, you know that you need to make a set of strong assumptions that, you know, sometimes are difficult to make in your research mind. You need to work with limited data and somewhat try to restrict yourself to the areas where you say you're confident about the conclusions you make. And this is what we try to do within the project and the resources we had. And climate change is a crucial one where I think, you know, additional benefits come about. But the whole population climate change interactions are very complex. And at the time, at least, we decided that complexity is beyond what we could do. So I'm very confident that there are additional benefits that would enhance that. But in this framework, we were challenged at the time of coming up with a specific estimate what these returns are. We just said we can't deliver on that. So, you know, I might very well agree with you that this might be conservative, and if that's the case, that would be very good from the discussion of this panel at this conference.
Great. And Jane, I understand that before you came to ICFP, you were asked to bring a picture that best represents how you would see the world in 2030. And I think we can get that picture up on the screen now. Can you tell us a little bit about this image and why you chose it?
Okay, to someone, that picture actually shows ordinary faces and young people who are actually smiling and posing for a picture, who are actually happy. But then you listen to their stories and get to understand that these are teen mothers, these have been married, these are survivors of child abuse, these are survivors of abuse in relationships. And to me, that said, yes, they now have the smiles in their face just because someone actually held out a hand and actually took them out of the situation that they had. But then to them, they now are mothers, and they actually want the best for their children in the future in 2030. And looking at them, I actually come to think of me being a mother one day. What kind of a world would I want my daughter to grow up in? I want her to be in a world where she can actually access free and affordable and comprehensive family planning and sexual reproductive health. I want her in a world where each and every person in the world will actually help out a hand to her and actually lift her up even after making the mistake of falling pregnant. I want her in a world whereby the parents will actually be able to talk free and frankly to their children about family planning and sexual reproductive health. I want her in a world whereby the government will actually take into account for every situation, for every sexual and reproductive health related issue, and actually put it into consideration that the future is the present, and actually realize that the young person is actually important and also has to be catered for. I want my daughter to actually live in a world where harmful norms are actually no longer practiced, just because in Africa, where I come from, it is actually taboo, or it is actually prohibited for an adolescent girl to start using family planning. But then, are we protecting our young girls by depriving them of this human right? We are not. So my 2030 is a world where if we all hold each other's hands and stand up to it, then we can actually celebrate in 2030 and say, yes, we made it. And my 2030 is a world where we actually would be sitting here right now in 2030 talking about family planning indeed being the best investment that we could ever make. And being the best buy. Yeah.
Great. We're going to go to the questions from our virtual community. And for those of you in the room, there are directions on the back of your badge about how you can join the virtual community if you have a question you want to send in as well. So can we go to the first question? So this is from Michelle Piri in Malawi. We're told that youth are the leaders of tomorrow, but when does tomorrow start? How long will it take? How long will it take for youth to reap the rewards of the demographic dividend? Jane, do you want to start? I think you know when tomorrow starts.
All right. So tomorrow starts right now, just because. Just because we are saying we do not want the child or the adolescent girl or the baby girl who is born today to actually live in a world where she will actually be deprived of accessing family planning freely and at an affordable price. We want a world where she will be able to be the best and to achieve her highest potential, and of which tomorrow starts now, and we do not have to wait until we leave this room, but tomorrow starts right now where you are sitting as it is.
Great. So, Hans-Peter, given that tomorrow's started, maybe I can get you to reflect on the second half of the question about how long do we have to wait for the payoff from the demographic dividend?
I was about to give a very similar answer as you did. You did it much more eloquently. In some ways, it begins immediately, right? We have these short-term effects on kind of maternal health, infant mortality, and then we have a set of lifelong returns that unfold as children become youth and as kind of demographic dividend changes in the age structure affect economic growth, and that may be across a decade. But it is indeed the case. Tomorrow is now, the returns start immediately, but the nice thing is they're going to unfold in these kind of sustained, interrelated ways over a long period of times.
Great. Go to the next question. This one from Lola, 23, in Kenya. I got pregnant when I was young, but pulled myself out of my unfortunate circumstance with the help of friends and family. How can we help other young girls to realize the same empowerment if they don't have the same familial support? Jane?
Okay, I believe that in the communities that we live in, so much takes place actually, and our adolescent girls and young women are being deprived of the rights that they actually are supposed to be receiving for free actually. And so I realized that it is actually important that each and every one person be involved in family planning, and it is actually important for even the leaders, the traditional leaders, to be involved, the political leaders and the religious leaders to actually be involved when it comes to sexual and reproductive health issues and family planning. We can actually help other young people by catching them young. I believe that it is actually important that it be included in the curriculum in our schools, and we start teaching young people at a very young age that it is actually important for them to be safe at all times. Just because as a dreams girl, I actually work under the Dreams Project, which actually pushes the theme of a young girl being determined, resilient, empowered, mentored and safe. And so, if we all have that mind that even the 6-year-old actually needs the information, actually needs the family planning services, that way we are actually going to be able to save the future of tomorrow, who are actually the present.
Thank you. Next question. So from Adabia in Nigeria, trying to explain the demographic dividend to my friends and family can be hard. How can I express the importance of this concept in terms they'll understand? Hans-Peter, do you want to give that a shot?
The elevator?
Yeah, you can get in the elevator too and give us 2 minutes of explanation.
So it is indeed the embeddedness of individuals in these, aggregate population structures. We interact with others in the world, and it begins with making sure sexual reproductive health is ensured, and that allows us to create populations that have both the structure and the composition we would like to have in terms of human capital and so forth. And that has to be a transformative process. And this answer may fail in providing the answer to what we had on the screen, but it is a difficult challenge to bring across.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'll take a little crack at it in the elevator too. The way I often explain it, Abia, is that it's like any investment, and some investments have predictable dividends and some have unexpectedly positive dividends. And the investment in women's empowerment and family planning has certain payoffs in terms of a more productive population, family, et cetera. The kinds of things Jane's been talking about. If we provide empowerment to young girls, and the earlier the better, the sooner they can control their own lives, make their own choices, help work to make their families healthier, themselves, their children, et cetera. Those are the known dividends. And then if we surround that with other important policies, like we heard from Minister Uzziel about the transformation plan here in Rwanda, we can get an even greater dividend. So the demographic dividend in itself doesn't guarantee all the returns. You need to have other social policies supporting it. It has some very predictable returns, which are sizable in and of themselves. But if you combine that with a broader set of social policies that really invests in human capital and economic development and reaching the poorest of the poor, you can have a fabulously large dividend. So let's try the next question. Did we answer all the questions? Well, let me come up with another question since. So, Jane, I'd be interested. We've heard through yesterday and the plenary opening last night about this is the first international conference on family planning with substantial youth participation. We've had youth participation before, but I understand there's close to 600 people and now over almost 4,000 participants. What's been the vibe? I mean, you've been part of the discussions with the youth. Are there things that you haven't had a chance to say or that they haven't had a chance to say that you think we should be paying attention to here at the conference?
I believe that this year's conference actually made it possible for actually the young people to have their voices heard, just because in the different countries that we come from, we have really different issues that we come across each and every day. And because we are the youth, we know that what affects us, and we know what we need the world to hear, and we know what we need actually to be corrected. And also during the conference, we got a chance to actually meet with the ministers who we never really have a chance to meet when we're back in our countries. And that way, I think it was an opportunity for us to actually tell them that we need them to hear us, to work with us. Just as it was actually said yesterday that we need them to listen to us, and we need everyone to actually hold our hand and be there for us and help us be the leaders that we actually make the present and the future better. And also, we have to realize that it being a conference on family planning issues affect mostly the young people. And as they affect the young people, it is actually us who suffer many a times. And I've had a situation whereby a young person actually lost their life because it actually started as a simple service provider who actually didn't want to provide a service. She got pregnant. When she was pregnant, she had to actually abort the baby. At abortion stage, she lost her life. And at that point, you realize that it actually started as a small thing, just because to someone, actually depriving someone of contraception is just, no, she is not yet old to access family planning. But then you later to realize that it only did not affect her future, it also took her life. So actually it is important that the youth be heard and the youth be taken seriously in whatever situation possible, just because we are the present and we are the future.
Great. I think just as you start to, yeah, we have another question from Sarah in the DRC. How can we show people the importance of the relationship between other development issues and the demographic dividend? Hans-Peter, you want to try that?
So the nice thing about the demographic dividend is that it has these multiple dimensions, and is in some ways a very encompassing theme, and that has changed the debate around family planning as well, that we think about investment in sexual reproductive health as a broader set of the development agenda, and think about the interaction of these different policies. And as you have said and has been said at this conference, it's clear neither of these policies alone is going to make a big difference. But family and reproductive health is a critical puzzle piece, and if it is in place, a lot of other policies can be effective and these processes can unfold.
Great, thank you. Do we have another question? From Aisha in Nigeria. Any advice or suggestions for improving political will for investing in family planning?
I mean, from my perspective, I think emphasizing this return to investment is a natural way of thinking about this. But then, obviously, you know, individuals much more local context need to add to this.
Okay. Also, the suggestion that I'll actually bring to play is the issue of the government, the leaders, actually involving the donors, the civil society, and the community as well. Just because it is actually important to handle the situation from the bottom, top, just because those at the bottom understand the issues that are at play better than the people that are actually at the top and the ones that are actually assessing the funds. So it is actually important that we come out with a strategy that actually will have security when it comes to contraceptive distribution and procurement. I believe that's how we can actually involve the political will when it comes to such situations.
I guess what I would add is that I think we have to have a range of arguments for different political leaders who may resonate with different rationales. You know, I think the investment framework is one that I think is important. It's obviously, you know, as you've shown, Hans-Peter, and others have demonstrated, that there's significant return on investment in women's empowerment and family planning services. But there's many other reasons, right? There's a rights perspective. We've talked about that. There's the importance of investing early from, you know, I think as Jane and other youth have emphasized at this conference. And then there's, you know, in many countries, and we heard this yesterday from the Prime Minister in the opening, have taken a very gender equality-focused approach to governance. And in those environments, perhaps the rights and equality framework resonate better. In other countries where that may not be as salient, the investment argument may be the stronger one. So I think we as a community have to arm ourselves, and fortunately it's relatively easy, with the multiple reasons why this is a good topic to invest in terms of being the right thing to do, being the smart thing to do, being the equitable thing to do, and it being a great investment for a lifetime of returns. So let's go to the next question from Claude in Senegal. Climate change is becoming more and more pressing. I want to show people how family planning can affect this. What can I say?
Okay. There's actually a situation whereby in some African countries, an adolescent girl can actually be traded for foodstuffs. And with climate change coming into play, most of the African countries are the ones that are usually affected. And of which, what we have realized is that when there's actually family planning in place, it will actually mean that even the adolescent girl is actually protected in the sense that they actually have the potential to achieve whatever they want to achieve, and they will actually stay longer in their education, and they actually have better opportunities as compared to when they do not have access to family planning. Well, climate change in the context of sexual and reproductive health and family planning, we can actually say that, for example, in Zimbabwe, there is an area where a girl can actually be traded for just the sake of maize. And this is because there is so much hunger in the family, and the adolescent girl is actually seen as an object that can be traded for food. And so without actually family planning in place and that much empowerment in place, then we're saying that we are saving our young girls from early and child marriages, and we are empowering them to be better people in the society, and at the same time giving them an opportunity to actually achieve their highest potential and actually realize that they also can make a difference in the communities.
Hans-Peter, do you want to add?
In the same spirit, I think climate change is one of the huge challenges that both individuals and societies face. What we need to make sure is that individuals, on one hand, can respond to these things in a multitude of decision-making, including fertility, sexual, reproductive health outcomes, and we develop the human capital to respond to these challenges. And in some ways, these things are interrelated, and as has come up often in this discussion, investments in family and sexual reproductive health empowerment is going to be one of these critical puzzle pieces that allows us to respond to climate change, as well as having the human capital and the capacity to respond to it.
Great, thank you. I think we probably have time for one or maybe two final questions. So from Diana in Uganda, how can we advocate for the rights of girls and the demographic dividend policy? What, in your experience, do policymakers respond to? We've already covered some of this, but any ideas about perhaps some of your specific examples of making these arguments to individual policymakers?
I haven't, I have not interacted much with individual policymakers, so I don't have all that much experience, to be honest.
Well, engaging policymakers, well, personally, I would actually leave that one out. I have not much experience when it comes to that. Yeah.
So maybe I'll add some from my perspective. It's interesting, and I think we heard this a little bit on the first panel. The best conversations I've had with policymakers are those who are already convinced, and in which case you're giving them another argument to make a stronger case to their cabinet, to their head of state, et cetera. The tougher arguments are where you have someone who's not as convinced, and you have to draw out the data from the Copenhagen Consensus and some of the other analyses of return on investments. And sometimes policymakers are confused by what seems to be different estimates of the return on investment. The Family Planning 2020 group has done a nice summary of the different ways of calculating return on investment. because you could, some of the lower returns are just looking at simpler things, that if you invest in family planning services, you avoid X amount of pregnancy-related services. It tends to be 2 or 3 times. If you take into account the broader health and economic effects that you've had in the Copenhagen consensus, you get a larger one. And sometimes people take different estimates of return on investment as evidence that we don't know for sure what the return is. And so we have to do a better job of explaining the different ways of measuring return on investment and laying out those arguments. And then I think the area where we probably have some work left to do is in countering the argument of, well, you know, that's fine, but I have other things that I could invest in. And some of those are good returns on investment too, agricultural development, infrastructure. And so I think we probably have some remaining work to do to locate the benefits. And I know you've been doing this in the Copenhagen consensus, and I may ask you to come to that a little bit, is how do we locate what are clearly positive returns of these investments against other investments and other choices that governments might make? And that's where I think, going back to your ranking, you know, you did rank trade liberalization as the #1 return on investment and family planning as the second, and you may want to say what some of the other some of the top 5 are. But how do you think about that within the Copenhagen consensus of framing it in the context of other things that governments with limited resources might be able to do?
So on one hand, I've been trying to be very careful to argue that investing in family planning helps you save on set of health expenditures, schooling expenditures, we got smaller cohort sizes. Because on one hand, what we would hope would happen is a kind of quality-quantity shift so that these smaller cohort sizes get additional investments. In some ways, you would hope that despite cohort sizes declining, schooling investments would remain constant, so that per capita schooling investments would go up, and the same with health investments and so forth. So anyway, I've been trying to shift away from these savings arguments. And on these broader hierarchies, some other ones, they're very prominent health investments that score very high on the Copenhagen consensus type of metrics. Early childhood investments, early health investments, for very similar reasons, because they have these lifelong returns.
Great. We're short of time, so I'm going to finish the panel there. Ask the audience to join me in thanking the panelists. Let me invite you to just stay here for the final piece before we close this session, which is a special video message that we're going to air from Jane Goodall. So can we cue that up?
Hello, this is Jane Goodall, and I really wish that I could be with you at this conference because I think it's tremendously important. When I first began working with chimpanzees in Tanzania's Gombe National Park, it was 1960, and the national park was part of the great equatorial forest belt stretching right across through Congo to the West African coast. When I flew over Gombe in a small plane in the early 90s, I was shocked to look down on a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. There were more people living there than the land could support, and they were too poor to buy food elsewhere. They were struggling to survive. I realized that if we didn't work with the local people, help them to improve their lives without destroying the environment, we couldn't even try to save the chimpanzees. And so in 1994, the Jane Goodall Institute began its Tukari program. We chose a team of local Tanzanians who went into the villages to ask them how they felt we could best help them. And so we began by helping to restore fertility to the overused farmland without using chemicals, and then improving health and education facilities, working with the local Tanzanian government. From the start, it was very clear that it was important to improve the reproductive health of women, to provide education about reproductive health. And We introduced family planning information in the very early days of Tukari. It was extremely well received. You know, in the old days, have a big family, it made you powerful, you shared out your land, and the children looked after you in your old age. But things had changed. And as families grew larger, land got more and more pressured with more and more people. And so when we provided this family planning information, it was really well received. And it's been shown all around the world that as women's education improves, as women are empowered, so family size tends to drop. We worked very hard to provide as many scholarships as we could to keep girls in school. Things like providing hygienic latrines with some privacy so that girls going through their first periods were not ashamed to go to school. We provided also microcredit opportunities based on Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank. This program has been so successful, and the trees have come back, the health of the environment has improved, the women are beginning to have smaller and healthier families, girls are staying longer in school, and some even going to university. Because of its success, the Tukari program, very similar programs, are operated by the Jane Goodall Institute in Uganda, in DRC, and to some extent also in the Republic of Congo and Senegal, and starting in other countries. It's impossible to overemphasize the importance of family planning, of enabling women to plan their families, to space out the births, for their own reproductive health, for the good of the children, and ultimately for the good of the environment. People realize that the health of the environment is not only important for the wildlife living there, but for their own future. I think the three greatest problems that we have to overcome in the world today are to alleviate poverty, because when you live in poverty, you cut down the last trees in your desperate effort to grow food to feed your family. We need to, the rest of us, live more sustainably on this planet, to stop taking nature's resources more quickly than Mother Nature can restore them. But then, so important is our growing human population. We literally are destroying our planet. And family planning has played such an important role in conservation. I wish that all people working on conservation would understand the importance of working with local communities. Wherever we work, the local communities are now our partners in conservation, and there's no question but that things have improved as women are empowered and play an ever more important role in village life and are able to plan their own families.
Well, let me thank our panelists again, both this panel and our first panel, and thank you as the audience. Hopefully we've gotten you off to a good start and thinking about all of the benefits of a return on investment to family planning for a lifetime of returns. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here to make a short announcement. We're going to have an amazing session after this. The next session is going to be the Women of Impact session, and we're going to have the First Lady of the Republic of Rwanda joining us, the First Lady of the Republic of Haiti, Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Jordan, as well as the founder of the Wellbeing Foundation. So please, if you need a break, you can go out, but make sure you're back here in 10 minutes so that we kick-start the Women of Impact session. Are you all excited? I hope you save your seat. and you'll be here in about 10 minutes. Thank you very much. I'll meet you all soon.